Chapter 12. The word education is a beautiful word. It comes from the Latin educare, which means to raise up, to take from the lowest degrees to the highest spheres of knowledge. The object of education is, then, to feed, expand, raise, enlighten, and strengthen the intelligence. When a Protestant speaks of education, that word is used and understood in its true sense. When he sends his little boy to a Protestant school, he honestly desires that he should be reared up in the spheres of knowledge as much as his intelligence will allow. But when the son of a Protestant has acquired a little knowledge, he wants to acquire more. Like the young eagle, he trims his wings for a higher flight. A noble and mysterious ambition has suddenly seized his young soul. Then he begins to feel something of that unquenchable thirst for knowledge which God himself has put in the breast of every child of Adam. It ought then to be a duty of both Roman Catholics and Protestants to assist the pupil in his flight. But is it so? No. When you Protestants send your children to school, you put no fetters to their intelligence. The Protestant scholar goes on from timid flutter to the bold confident flight, from one region of knowledge to another still higher, till he loses himself in that ocean of light and truth and life, which is God. Thus only the truly great, truly powerful, and the truly free nations in the world are Protestants. Everywhere they are the advance guard in the ranks of progress, science, and liberty, leaving far behind the unfortunate nations whose hands are tied by the ignominious iron chains of popery. The young Roman Catholic scholar is born with the same bright intelligence as the Protestant one. He is endowed by his Creator with the same powers of mind as his Protestant neighbor. He has the same noble aspiration implanted by God. He is sent to school like the Protestant boy to receive what is called education. He at first understands that word in its true sense. He goes to school in the hope of being raised, elevated as high as his intelligence and his personal efforts will allow. But here begin the disappointments and tribulations of the Roman Catholic student. He is allowed to raise himself only high enough to be on a level with the big toes of the Pope. Remember that the Pope is the only source of science, knowledge, and truth. The knowledge of the Pope is the ultimate limit of learning and light to which humanity can attain. You are not allowed to know and believe what His Holiness does not know and believe. On the 22nd of June, 1663, Galileo was obliged to fall on his knees to escape the cruel death ordered by the Pope. He signed with his own hand the following retraction: "I adjure, curse, and detest the error and heresy of the motion of the earth, etc., etc." That learned man had to degrade himself by swearing a lie, that the earth does not move around the sun. Thus the wings of that giant eagle of Rome were clipped by the scissors of the Pope. But God would not allow the giant intellect to be entirely strangled by the bloody hands of the implacable enemy of light and truth, the Pope. Sufficient strength and life had remained in Galileo to enable him to say when rising up, "This will not prevent the earth from moving." The infallible decree of the infallible Pope, Urban VIII, against the motion of the earth is signed by the Cardinals Felia, Guido, Desiderio, Antonio, Belengaro, and Fabricio. It says in the name and by the authority of Jesus Christ, the plenitude of which resides in his vicar, the Pope, that the proposition that the earth is not the center of the world, and that it moves with a diurnal motion is absurd, philosophically false, and erroneous in faith. What a glorious thing for the Pope of Rome to be infallible! He infallibly knows that the earth does not move around the sun. And what a blessed thing for the Roman Catholics to be governed and taught by such an infallible being. In consequence of that infallible decree, you will admire the following act of humble submission of two celebrated Jesuit astronomers, Lucier and Jauquier. Newton assumes in his third book the hypothesis of the earth moving around the sun. The propositions of that author could not be explained, except through the same hypothesis. We have therefore been forced to act a character not our own. But we declare our entire submissions of the decrees of the Supreme Pontiffs of Rome against the motion of the earth. Newton's Principia, Volume 3, page 450. Here you see two other learned Jesuits who have written a very able work to prove that the earth moves around the sun, trembling at Vatican threats to kill them, submit to the decrees of the popes of Rome against the motion of the earth. These two learned Jesuits tell a most contemptible and ridiculous lie to save themselves from the wrath of that great light extinguisher whose throne is in the city of the 7 hills. Had the Newtons, the Franklins, the Fultons, and the Morses been Romanists, their names would have been lost to the obscurity which is the natural heritage of the abject slaves of the popes. Being told from their infancy that no one had any right to make use of his private judgment, intelligence, and consequence in the research of truth, they would have remained mute and motionless at the feet of the modern and terrible God of Rome, the Pope. But they were Protestants. In that great and glorious word, Protestant, is the secret of the marvelous discoveries with which they have changed the face of the world. They were Protestants. Yes, they had passed their young years in Protestant schools, where they had read a book which told them that they were created in the image of God, and that great God had sent his eternal Son Jesus to make them free from the bondage of man. They had read in the Protestant book, for which the Bible is the most Protestant book in the world, that man had not only a conscience, but an intelligence to guide them. They had learned that intelligence and conscience had no other master but God, no other guide but God, no other light but God. On the walls of their Protestant schools, the Son of God had written the marvelous words, "Come unto me, I am the light, the way, the life." Why is it that Roman Catholic nations not only remain stationary, but decay? Go to their schools and look at their principles, which are sown in the young intelligences of their unfortunate slaves, and you will have the key to that sad mystery. What is the first and daily school lesson taught to the Roman Catholic? Is it not that one of the greatest crimes which a man can commit is to follow his own private judgment? This means that he has eyes, ears, and intelligence, but he cannot make use of them, without danger of being eternally damned. His superiors, the priest and pope, must see for him, hear for him, and think for him. If this appears to be an exaggeration, allow me to force the Church of Rome to come here and speak for herself. Here are the very words of the so-called Saint Ignatius Loyola, founder of the Jesuit Society. As for holy obedience, this virtue must be perfect in every point, in execution, in will, in intellect, doing which is enjoyed with all celerity, spiritual joy, and perseverance, persuading ourselves that everything is just, suppressing every repugnant thought and judgment of one's own in a certain obedience, and let everyone persuade himself that he who lives under obedience should be moved and directed under divine providence by his superior, just as if he were a corpse, which allows itself to be moved and led in every direction. You ask me what can be the use of hundreds of millions of moral corpses. Why not let them live? The answer is easy. The great, the only object of the thoughts and workings of the Pope and the priest is to raise themselves above the rest of the world. They want to be high above the heads not only of the common people, but of the kings and emperors of the world. They want to be even higher than God. Speaking of the Pope, the Holy Ghost says, "He opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he, as God, sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God." 2 Thessalonians 2:4. To attain their object, the priests have persuaded their millions and millions of slaves that they were mere corpses, that they must have no will, no conscience, no intelligence of their own. When they have made a pyramid of all those motionless, inert corpses, so high that its top goes into the very abode of the old divinities of the pagan world, they put themselves and their popes at the top and say to the rest of the world, "Who among you are as high as we are? Where are the kings and the emperors whose thrones are as elevated as ours? Are we not at the very top of humanity?" "Yes, yes," I answered to the priests of Rome. "You are very high and very high indeed. Your throne is higher than anything we know. But it is a throne of corpses." Let me put before your eyes another extract of the Jesuit teaching from the Spiritual Exercises by founder Ignatius Loyola. "We ought ever to hold as a fixed principle that what I see white, I believe to be black. if the superior authorities of the church define it to be so. You all know that it is the avowed desire of Rome to have public education in the hands of the Jesuits. She says everywhere that they are the best, the model teachers. Why so? Because they more boldly and more successfully than any of her other teachers aim at the destruction of the intelligence and the conscience of their pupils. When a man who has been trained a sufficient time by them, he most perfectly becomes a moral corpse. His superiors can do what they please with him. Listen to the words of the infallible Pope, Gregory XVI, in his celebrated encyclical of the 15th of August, 1832. If the Holy Church so requires, let us sacrifice our own opinions, our knowledge, our intelligence, the splendid dreams of our imagination, and the most sublime attainments of the human understanding. It is when considering those antisocial principles of Rome that Mr. Gladstone wrote not so long ago, "No more cunning plot was ever devised against the freedom, the happiness, and the virtue of mankind than Romanism," in a letter to Earl Aberdeen. Now, Protestants, do you begin to understand the great distance between the word education among you and the meaning of the same word in the Church of Rome? By education, you mean to raise man to his highest sphere of manhood. Rome means to lower him below the most stupid brutes. By education, you mean to teach a man that he is a free agent, that liberty within the limits of the laws of God and his country is a gift to everyone, that it is better to die a free man than to live a slave. Rome wants to teach that there is only one man who is free, the Pope, and that all the rest are born to be his abject slaves in thought, will, and action. I ask you, American Protestants, what would become of your fair country if you allowed the Church of Rome to teach the children of the United States? What future of shame, degradation, and slavery you prepare for your country if Rome succeeds in forcing you to support such schools? What kind of woman would come from the schools of nuns who would teach them that the highest pitch of perfection in a woman is when she obeys her superior, the priest, in everything he commands her? That your daughter will never be called to give an account to God for the actions she will have done to please and obey her superior, the priest, the bishop, and the pope? Again, what kind of men and citizens will come out from schools of those Jesuits who believe and teach that a man has attained the perfection of manhood only when he is a perfect spiritual corpse before his superior?